Title of this story is The Passenger in 27A. The Red-Eye Air Canada flight from Los Angeles touched down in Toronto a few minutes early at 5:35 a.m. and reached the gate 10 minutes later. Sleepy passengers, for it was 2:30 in the morning Los Angeles time, reached for their carry-on bags in the overhead bins and headed for the exit. The occasional passenger groaned himself gradually into wakefulness, ignoring the lemming-like rush to deplane, and waited till the surge subsided. Eventually there remained but a single passenger still asleep in 27A. "Excuse me, sir," said the stewardess, or should I say the member of the cabin staff, politely. "This is the termination of Flight 794 and it's time to deplane." Still receiving no response from 27A, she touched him lightly on the shoulder, at which he merely slumped forward. Recognizing that something was seriously amiss, she walked to the front of the plane to summon the purser. It took a few more minutes before it was ascertained that passenger 27A had ascended to an even higher altitude than the 33,000 feet at which Flight 794 had travelled from Los Angeles. Strangely, his pockets revealed neither wallet nor passport, nor was there any luggage in the overhead bin that might have belonged to him. A 911 call was initiated, and when the ambulance arrived it was directed onto the tarmac alongside the Airbus A320. In due course, paramedics removed the earthly remains of passenger 27A at the rear door of the plane, along with the garbage and the drinks trolley, so as not to traumatize deplaning passengers with the sight of one of their own being trundled through the corridors of Terminal 1 on a gurney and covered with a sheet. Meanwhile, the remaining passengers from Flight 794 had made their way to immigration. Among them was the holder of a passport in the name of Nathan Kerwin. He approached the officer in booth 14 among the last passengers from Flight 794, having visited the washroom en route. "Good morning," said the officer as he slid the passport through the scanner. "What was the nature of your travel? Business or pleasure?" "Business. I've been to a scientific conference in Los Angeles." "Are you bringing back any alcohol or tobacco products?" "No," came the truthful reply. "Okay, welcome home, Mr. Cohen." The passenger in question walked briskly from the immigration area, down the escalator and into the baggage hall of Terminal 1. He ignored the luggage belts, for he had no checked baggage, and made his way towards the exit. There he handed his immigration card to the bored-looking officer. In the public area of the terminal, he made a local call from a payphone, despite having two different cell phones in his carry-on bag. He advised his cousin in Etobicoke that he would take a cab and be with her within the hour. There's no doubt that coincidence and happenstance, meaning pure luck, can have remarkable effects on the course of a person's life. I must mention here that the holder of the passport in the name of Nathan Kerwin, who was a young chemistry professor at the University of Toronto, he had indeed been in Los Angeles, where he'd presented a scientific paper at the national meeting of the American Chemical Society. However, the passport was being carried by one Angelo DeVito, a small-time hood member of a leading Los Angeles crime family. DeVito had made a serious miscalculation in the choice of his latest girlfriend, Rita, a distant cousin of the crime boss with whom he had seen arriving at Nick's, a club favoured by lesser underworld figures. Fortunately for Angelo, what had not been observed was the time he'd spent with Rita in one of the private booths, where Rita had offered him a first sandwich, with the promise of more to come the next time they met. The next afternoon, Angelo's brother Vince called Angelo in a state of great agitation. "And you've got to leave town. Big Mike knows you went to Nick's with Rita. You're in big shit. He's sending over a couple of guys to teach you respect. You need to leave town right now." So it was that Angelo DeVito decided that he would arrive unannounced at the home of his second cousin Madison Neve in suburban Toronto. Removing only his passport and a stash of cash from his apartment, he took a cab to LAX. There he purchased at great expense a one-way ticket to Toronto on Air Canada Flight 794, leaving at 10 o'clock that same evening. Here, chance intervened. Angelo found himself in seat 27C, next to Professor Cohen in 27A. Cohen was passably similar in appearance to himself, about 5'10", 180 pounds or thereabouts, and dark-haired. Nothing too unusual about that. Description fits tens of thousands of North American males. However, what neither Cohen nor DeVito knew was that Cohen, despite his youth, was a ticking medical time bomb, timed to explode that very night. And so it was, some 7 miles above the Grand Canyon, that Nathan Cohen suffered an aortic aneurysm, slumped forward and died, instantly. In later autopsy, the coroner opined that he could not have been saved, even had it occurred in the ER of a top-class hospital. Angelo, to whom death was not exactly a stranger, observed Professor Cohen's exit through life's departure gate. Almost at once he saw an opportunity had been presented to him to cover his tracks. By further good fortune, Angelo had begun his life of crime at the age of 13 in picking pockets. In the near darkness of the red-eye flight, most of the passengers were asleep or engrossed in an in-flight movie. Hence it was no problem for him to find and extract the professor's wallet, passport, boarding pass and customs card, which latter the attentive academic had already filled out. Armed with these documents, Angelo familiarized himself with the life of Nathan Oliver Cohen. The customs card, he learned that his seatmate had purchased only lingerie to a total of $138, presumably a gift to his wife or girlfriend. He also discovered his place of employment from his University of Toronto ID card, his address in a place called Mississauga, and the name of his wife or girlfriend, Virginia, who had thoughtfully and helpfully inscribed the back of the wallet-sized photo, "From Ginny with all my love." He carried an iPhone 9 and a Visa card issued by a bank identified as CIBC. When eventually the plane landed at Toronto, Angelo waited until most of the passengers around him had joined the line to deplane. He retrieved the one remaining carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, assuming, correctly as it turned out, it belonged to his erstwhile seatmate. However, to be on the safe side, he stopped at the men's room before presenting himself to immigration and opened the carry-on in one of the stalls. There he found a Toshiba laptop, dirty underwear, the incomprehensible text of something called NMR Studies of Novel Ziegler-Natta Polymerization Catalysts, and the aforementioned lingerie in a Victoria's Secret bag. Before leaving the stall, he removed the SIM cards from the 2 cell phones and put both phones and cards into the bag, so there would be no way for anyone to track his movements through their GPS software. An hour later, he presented himself at the front door of an address in Etobicoke, to the surprise and not unalloyed joy of his relative Madison. She expressed some hesitation at the prospect of taking in Angelo, whom she hardly knew, who was, given the circumstances, undoubtedly a fugitive from who knew what. Hopefully Milo, a husband of Bulgarian ancestry, would understand. Meanwhile, Virginia Cohen had risen at about 6:30 with the expectation that Nathan would soon be home from his conference trip. In hopes that he would not decide to go to the lab directly, she eschewed getting washed or dressed, but simply brushed out her hair and donned a housecoat over her nightwear. Immediately on rising, she called Nate on his cell phone. She obtained only an out-of-service signal and surmised that his flight must not yet have landed. However, recourse to the Air Canada website to check the expected arrival time revealed that 794 had landed an hour earlier. Perhaps the cellular network was down for some reason. When there was no sign of her husband by 10 o'clock, Ginny reacted with an ill-defined mixture of concern and irritation. Perhaps he had gone directly to the lab after all. So she called the University of Toronto at Mississauga. There being no reply at Nate's office, she reached the number of his research lab. Kerwin Lab, answered the voice of Amy DeBoer, one of Nate's graduate students. However irrationally, Ginny always felt somewhat defensive with Amy, she of the long dark tresses, ample figure and piercing intelligence. Ginny could not help feeling a degree of jealousy and competition with the young woman. "This is Ginny. Could I speak to Nathan if he's in, please?" "Sorry, Mrs. Kerwin," replied Amy, as always irritatingly formal and correct. "Dr. Kerwin has not been in yet today. I guess he's on his way." "Did he tell you how well our paper had been received at the ACS?" "He seemed pretty excited from the email he sent us in the lab." Ginny did not know about the response to the research paper. Her ignorance and its identification by Amy as our paper raised her jealousy index a couple of points. "Thanks, Amy. Just ask him to give me a call when he comes in, if you would, please." "No problem, Mrs. Kerwin. Have a good day." And that was the end of the conversation. Meanwhile, back at Lester B. Pearson International Airport, was consternation concerning the mystery passenger, formerly in seat 27A. Who was he, and how had he managed to board the plane, apparently without any ID or boarding pass? The Peel Regional Police Airport Division has responsibility for the airport. They called in Air Canada's own local security personnel, who stated unequivocally that no one was ever allowed to board an Air Canada flight without both approved ID, passport in the case of an international flight, and boarding pass. Could this person have been planning to present himself a refugee status, had somehow managed to dispose of his documentation in the garbage or down one of the lavatories during the flight? A search of the garbage and the lavatory contents, now mixed with those from other flights, ensued. But when it had been completed, the searchers came up empty-handed, apart from soiled disposable gloves. As an additional point of confusion, the cause of passenger 27A's death was not yet known. Was it natural causes? Homicide by one of the other passengers? A drug overdose? All these possibilities would have to be inquired into at the time of the autopsy. Air Canada's passenger manifest for Flight 794 was then cross-checked in Immigration Canada's list of those who had entered Canada that morning through Pearson Airport. The name Angelo DeVito, a US passport holder, was present on the Air Canada manifest, but not in the immigration database. Perhaps 27A was DeVito, who had originally been assigned to 27C. Maybe DeVito had asked his seatmate if he could have the window seat. According to the manifest, 27A had been assigned to one Nathan Kerwin. However, Kerwin had passed through immigration at 6:13 that morning. Clearly the unknown passenger was not Kerwin. Contact with the US Citizenship Service soon provided a picture of DeVito, along with physical data including height, weight, hair and eye colour. These gave a tentative match between DeVito and passenger 27A. Accordingly, the US Department of Homeland Security alerted the LAPD to the possibility, as yet unconfirmed, that US citizen Angelo DeVito might be the identity of a deceased John Doe, now resting at Toronto Airport. No more could be done until the autopsy of passenger 27A was complete. When this was done, it revealed that the subject had died of a massive aneurysm. Although toxicology tests would be carried out, there was at this point no reason to believe that the aneurysm had been precipitated by a noxious agent, nor were there signs of puncture marks on the body to suggest foul play. Accordingly, photographs were sent to the LAPD along with the following information. Male subject, mid-30s, 178 centimeters, 5'10", 79.6 kilograms, 178 pounds, brown eyes, brown hair, blood type A positive, no tattoos or other distinguishing marks. Well before this, on the same day that Nate had failed to arrive on Flight 794, Ginny Kerwin had contacted Peel Regional Police to report her husband's disappearance. Initially, they showed little interest. People are reported missing every day, they told her. They usually turn up with some more or less reasonable explanation of where they'd been. Was Ginny sure that her husband had been on the flight? Had he stayed over in Los Angeles? Might he have arrived but gone to visit someone else on his way home? A relative, or, put as delicately as possible, a girlfriend? At this, visions of the ripe young graduate student Amy DeBoer swirled into Ginny's mind. It was with shame and embarrassment that she pushed the image away, but not before the investigating officer had noted her discomfort and drawn his own conclusions. Thus, it was only after a couple of days that Ginny's missing persons report began to be taken seriously. Police cross-checked the name of the missing man with immigration, discovering that Nathan Oliver Kerwin was indeed in the country, though it was a mystery as to why he had not yet shown up at home. Once the autopsy had been completed, the Airports Division contacted the LAPD again, to say the death of the presumed Angelo DeVito appeared to be entirely of natural causes. It would now be appropriate to contact Mr. DeVito's next of kin. Accordingly, the LAPD appraised his mother Rosa Maria and his brother Vincenzo of the information they received. As far as they could tell, the information fitted Angelo, and the photographs were at least not inconsistent with the appearance of Angelo. Arrangements were therefore set in motion to have the body of the presumed Angelo DeVito returned to its relatives in California. Following his arrival and a formal identification of the body, which still seemed to be compatible with its identity as Angelo, an elaborate funeral was set in motion. The funeral home made up the corpse to be indistinguishable to relatives, friends and acquaintances from the Angelo they'd known and loved. Visitation was attended by many of the aforementioned circle of friends, acquaintances and minor crooks. Rita was there wearing a black fur wrap whose significance in honouring the deceased was known to her alone. A requiem mass at St. Aloysius Roman Catholic Church was followed by cremation. The ashes were then interred in the DeVito funeral vault. These developments were unknown to the real Angelo back in Ontario. By the time that news of the death of the supposed Angelo reached Madison and Milo, the funeral had already taken place. Reckon you're really deep shit now behind Milo. Can't go back to LA now because you're dead. This time, Angelo was working on the side for Milo, who ran a light removals and delivery company in suburban Toronto. This was inevitably a strictly cash arrangement, since Angelo's US social security was not interchangeable with a Canadian social insurance number. This minor inconvenience led, through another of life's inconveniences, to Angelo's downfall, collapsing the whole house of cards. One Tuesday morning, as Angelo was making deliveries along Eglinton Avenue, he was rear-ended by a young woman who was texting on her cell phone. The damage was slight, and for different reasons both drivers would have been pleased to let the matter drop. Unfortunately, however, traffic immediately backed up, and a sharp-eyed and civic-minded bystander called 911. As luck, bad luck in Angelo's case, would have it, the City of Toronto police cruiser was only 2 blocks away. Driver's licenses, ownerships and insurance were demanded. The insurance was up to date, as was the ownership of the van in Milo's name. The problem arose with the driver's license. The only one that was valid in Ontario was the one belonging to the late Nathan Kerwin. This Angelo duly handed over. Before the advent of computer systems, that would have been the end of it. Since the owner of the license was not under suspension, no fines or arrest warrants outstanding. Alas, the computer system immediately matched the name on the driver's license with that of a missing person, Nathan Kerwin. "Excuse me, sir," said the officer, "are you Nathan Oliver Kerwin?" "Yes," replied Angelo. "So could you explain why you're listed in our system as a missing person, sir?" Despite bluster to the effect that he was certainly not missing, for he was standing in the flesh right before the officer, the problem refused to go away. A more detailed interview in the back of the officer's cruiser ensued, after which the interrogation moved to Toronto's Police 13 Division, Here, the bearer of the driver's license had to admit that he was Angelo DeVito and not Nathan Kerwin. There being no record of Angelo's legal entry into Canada, he eventually confessed to the whole series of events that had begun several weeks before on Air Canada Flight 794 from Los Angeles. When all the pieces were put together, it was realized, with all-round embarrassment, the presumed Angelo DeVito, who had been repatriated to Los Angeles for funeral obsequies, was in fact the late Nathan Kerwin. Angelo was charged with driving without a valid license, possession of stolen property under $5,000 in the form of Kerwin's various personal effects, and illegal entry into Canada. These ultimately resulted in a 45-day prison sentence, followed by deportation back to the United States, where his former associates were reputed to be interested to see him again. In suburban Mississauga, 2 female officers called on Virginia Kerwin with distressing news. First, they asked if they might come in, and asked if the 3 of them might sit down. They told her that the police had been able to locate Nathan's driver's license. Unfortunately, they said, his other effects had been stolen from her husband by an American who travelled with him on the flight home from Los Angeles and who was presently in custody. With mounting dread, Ginny began to anticipate the next piece of news. The officers were extremely sorry to have to tell her that her husband had died on the flight home. The cause was an aneurysm, a bursting of his main artery, and they believed that death had been both instantaneous and painless. They offered their deepest condolences. Naturally, the traumatized Ginny soon composed herself sufficiently to ask where her husband Nate's body was being kept. Didn't they need her to identify him? At this, 2 officers squirmed visibly with acute embarrassment. There was silence. Ginny asked what seemed to be the problem. The officers, each silently cursing the police chief who had selected them for this delicate assignment, had to confess they no longer had the body. What do you mean you no longer have my husband's body? Where is it then? It had been agreed back at the police station that the 2 officers should reveal no more than there had been a case of misidentification, and that Mr. Kerwin's body had been sent in error to what had been thought to have been his relatives in the States. No, they did not know where the relatives lived or who they were. No, they did not know whether he'd yet been buried. Ginny realized that she was being stonewalled. One might describe Virginia Kerwin as merely a suburban housewife, but she was no pushover. Once she recovered somewhat from the shock of the news about her husband, she went into tigress mode. Soon the whole story emerged. The identity of Angelo DeVito, his supposed repatriation to an LA crime family, and the location of his ashes, all became known. Virginia was absolutely outraged that her husband had been shipped off to California without her knowledge. Should it not have been obvious to her that the deceased passenger on Air Canada Flight 794 might have been her husband, who was missing? Face fact, she'd immediately reported him missing and been brushed off to the information he'd probably gone off to visit a mistress. And not only that, he'd been shipped off to the US like a piece of missing luggage, and he'd been sent to an LA crime family. Worst of all, they'd cremated him as if he was their own. She wanted her husband back right now, and they could set right about digging up their family vault like yesterday. Now, as it happened, Virginia's father was a partner in a minor Toronto law firm. Minor it might have been, but he had access to well-reputed civil litigators. He needed little pushing from his daughter, although he actually got lots of it, to set in motion litigation with the help of one of Toronto's foremost civil litigators. He made it clear that the story would be of great interest to the news media, reflecting badly as it did on so many parties: Air Canada, Canada's Citizenship and Immigration, Peel Regional Police at a minimum. A civil suit on behalf of Ms. Kerwin in the amount of $10 million followed. Its intent is to hold these parties to account for their incompetence, to ensure that such a travesty should never happen again, and for the pain and suffering caused to the traumatized Ms. Cohen.